everyone. So during the Second World War, one of the biggest challenges that the US faced was the fact that most of their fighter jets were being bombed down. And they figured that they needed to sort this out, otherwise this war was going to be shorter than they had planned and in a way that would not amuse them. And so what they resolved to do is to turn it into numbers. So they hired a statistician, a guy named Abraham Wald. And Abraham's task was very simple, but it wasn't easy. His task was to figure out in which part of the plane was he going to put an armor. Now the armor was heavy, so they couldn't put it everywhere. And so they had to figure it. And Edward, being a statistician, he did what statisticians do, gather data and spread it out to see the distribution. And once he did that, he figured out the areas in which are receiving a lot of heat and the areas that are not. And the moment the US Army leaders saw this, they're like, okay, that's pretty clear. We need to put the armor in areas that are being bombed at the most. But Abraham knew that would be a mistake. And they said, why is that? He said, because right now, we've only done analysis to the fighter jets that made it back to the base. And the fact that they can take hit in these areas and still be able to come back, it means that this area is not the problem. The question that we should be asking ourselves is, for the fighter jets that did not make it back, where were they hit? And so what he did is, he decided to put it in an area that wasn't receiving a lot of heat. He pinpointed the specific areas, and that's where he put it. Now, this is something that I see is also happening in education in Africa. And often you hear headlines like 53% of East African graduates are unemployable, or headlines like how a lot of people are applying for jobs that are very few. And the moment you hear these headlines, your first instinct is that we need to help university graduates be able to get jobs impulsively. And that's just not the way to go, because if you look at the numbers, it's only 6% of people who are supposed to be in university that are actually in university. And if you zoom into this number, you realize that of the poorest people, only 1% of the bottom half of the poorest people actually make it to university. And so we've been looking at the holes that are easy to see. And because of that, we've been investing a lot in the things that are low-hanging fruits, that we can see immediate fruits. But truth is, if we are to change Africa at all, if we are to leapfrog Africa, it's secondary school students and not university students that are actually going to change Africa. And the main reason why I'm saying this is, often you hear statistics like how 60% of young people in Africa are under the age 25. But if you zoom into that number, you realize that around 50% of those are actually under the age 19. And age 19 is the age where people are actually in secondary schools and not university. And so primary enrollment has increased. Things like UPE, Universal Primary Education, and a lot of other initiatives have ensured that we are getting a lot of young people into primary school. But then if you look at tertiary education, very few people are there, and yet that's where we're receiving a lot of attention. And this hurts us. So what is it that can be done to be able to solve for this? One, teach them English. The reason why I'm saying teach them English is because the body of knowledge in the world is in English. And a lot of people usually frown upon learning English. They think that if you're speaking English, it means you're letting go of your local languages, or you're being whatever other things, that negative things that are being said against the language. But the fact is, the entire body of knowledge in the world is in English. And if our young people are to compete in the global stages, then they need to be able to get these things. I personally learned programming when I was the age 11. And I had to learn English before I could learn programming. There's no way you're going to learn how to create apps in Swahili or in Shona or in Twi. And because of that, if we want these people to compete in the global stage, the same way their peers are doing it, then we need to make sure that they learn English. The second thing that I think is very important is we need to teach them manners. And when I say manners, I don't mean manners in the African sense of manners where you greet your parents or you help them carry goods, etc., etc., etc. Those are manners, but 10 centuries ago. In the 21st century, the manners that we are talking about are things that don't even need a university degree. Things like being a good communicator. Things like just observing time, or being curious, or being able to give and receive feedback. These are the manners, and they don't need a university degree. If you look at most of the young people of Africa, even in companies, in corporates, the biggest complaints that you will get is, yes, they're educated, but they're just not good enough. A survey was done in 2015, and they figured that 63% of Tanzanian graduates are unemployable. And this wasn't a reflection to the fact that they did not graduate. It's a reflection to the fact that they're just not good enough for jobs. And so these are manners. They're called soft skills, etc. But in the 21st century, these are simple manners that don't need a university degree, that you need to have in everything that you're doing if you're to excel. And the last thing, the second to last thing that I feel is very important is for us to teach them failure. Because with the examination system that we are currently going with, failure is being seen as the opposite of success and not the part of it. We assume that success is a straight line. You either have it or you don't. But we don't take into account that failing is part of success, not the opposite of it. Now, I went to both private and public schools. I did my education in Tanzania as well as outside Tanzania. And from my personal experience, this is how we would be taught failure, right? Every quarter of the year, teachers would be in a room, and students would go in one after the other. And then for everything that you did wrong, you'll be beaten once. So if you failed the exam, you'll be beaten once. If there was a day where you passed them on the streets, you did not say hi, you'll be beaten another one. Or if there's a day they saw you without your shirt tucked in, then you'll be beaten twice. So it used to happen like that, to a point whereby it used to be a game, me and my friends, to see who will receive the least beatings when they enter into that room. And in the end of the day, nobody could come out of it without being beaten. Now, in contrast, I also had a conversation with a student from one of the top performing schools in Tanzania. And I said, how do you guys interact with your teachers? And he said, well, we usually have meetings at least every weekend, a one-on-one, where the teacher just asks us how we are doing and whether we are facing any struggle. And I was like, must be nice, because that's something I would love to see happen to me and for other people. And it made sense why these students were excelling, because they had that close relationship to a point whereby they were not afraid to fail. And they were getting feedback immediately on what's working and what's not working. And once we do this, we'll be able to get students, not just inside the classroom, but even outside the classroom. They'll be able to get feedback easier. They won't be afraid to be criticized. They will not be after perfection as much as they're after improving. And I think this is something that a lot of young people are not facing. In 2012, there was an event that Google carried here in Dar es Salaam, and I attended that event. And one of the people from Google was asked, how come you guys never fail? How come everything you do takes off? And the lady said, it's not that we don't fail, it's just that we fail fast and we fail cheap. When something is not working, we quickly cut it off and we move on before it gets to a point whereby there's damage. And so I think this is the same thing that we need to teach young people, whether they're in school or not. We need to teach them failure is part of success and not the opposite of it. Now, the last thing, which I think we need to do, is we need to give them back their toys. And the main reason why I'm saying we need to give them back their toys is, by default, all African children are very creative. They can do the most amazing things. They don't have to have those kind of cars. They had this kind of cars, right? They would create this out of a bottle that they saw on the streets. And they also had just random games that they played. They just take a wheel and start going with it on the streets out of nothing. And I think this is creative. Even in the sense of soccer, they did not buy soccer balls. They would take papers together, form them together, and take trees and put them as posts and just start playing. I know I did that. And what's amazing is this wasn't done by parents. It wasn't done by companies. It was done by them when they're very young, when they don't know about creativity or 21st century skills. And it didn't just stop with the young people. It also went with parents. They didn't have baby walkers the way we know them now. They made their own, the kind of baby walkers that I used, that most of you guys used. And even when it comes to cooking, they did not buy coconut. They made, we call it kibao chambuzi, which you would use to be able to create coconut milk. It's very creative to create something like that, especially in this day and age, in the 21st century. But they didn't have the technology. They did not have industry or whatever. They did this with their bare hands. And so the question truly is, where and when did we stop creating? At what point did all this fade away? And is it because maybe we cornered young people and told them this is the way that you're supposed to go, these are things that you're not supposed to do? Did we tell them you need to stop playing with clay and build pots, and told them you need to study physics? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that nobody ever learned anything against their will. And the way we are trying to corner these young people is in a way that is preventing their growth. And if we teach them those things, if we give them those skills, then they'll be able to get to a point whereby they are going to channel their natural creativity with their 21st century. Teach them English, teach them manners, teach them failure, and give them back their toys. Once we do this, we'll be able to help these young people so that they can excel in a way that even if they don't make it to the 6% that go to university, they'll be able to excel and be able to innovate in a way that they can compete in the global stage. And I believe that that is an idea that is worth sharing. Thanks.